Good evening. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker of the evening, Kayla Patrick. Kayla Patrick is a senior education policy analyst with a deep interest in using database analysis to inform U.S. education policy and practices, especially to improve the lives of underserved children of color. Her expertise includes school discipline policies and college and career readiness. She currently works at the Education Trust, where she leads actionable and impactful projects like inequities in advanced coursework. And they cared, an initiative to create better, safer learning environments for girls of color, and also strategies to solve unfinished learning. Prior to joining the Education Trust, Kayla worked at the National Women's Law Center, where she conducted research and data analysis on critical issues that impact women and girls. While there, she led a team to produce a well-publicized report, Let Her Learn, Stopping School Pushout for Girls. She also co-authored a report with 20 Black girls in Washington, D.C., titled Dress Code, which highlighted the harmful effects of dress codes for girls' education. This work was recently cited in the education platform of 2020 presidential candidate, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and will soon be featured in the Smithsonian National Museum of American History's exhibit on girlhood. Kayla received her Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from Wellesley College and her Master of Arts in Education Policy from Teachers College at Columbia University. We welcome Kayla Patrick as our keynote speaker.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm going to just share my screen here before we get started. I really want to start off by saying it's an honor and a privilege to be included in this program today. It's always inspiring to be included in a celebration of our young people, so I am very happy to be here with you all today. I was asked to talk a little bit about why I do this work. And before I jump into that, I want to highlight why I do this work. I think that my approach to the work is the most important thing to share with young people who are thinking about policy, especially because policy often doesn't include people who look like me. So I'm going to center this talk around something I'm truly passionate about. And I hope that after this short talk, you will think about the long history of racism, injustice, and oppression in this country and how that often comes to life within school buildings. I also hope that you leave thinking about systems working poorly instead of placing blame on individuals, which I know can be hard to do, but let me tell you exactly what I mean by that. In education, people are quick to blame parents, students, and teachers for poor educational opportunities. But the real problems are the systems created by 400 years of racism and anti-Blackness, and not the people who are harmed by those systems. So let's jump into the work that I do. Nothing makes what I just said more clear than just about every data point we have around educational opportunities. This particular chart highlights what we know about 8th grade math outcomes. Black people in this country have made their marks in just about every way possible. We are creators, scholars, inventors, artists, writers, and the list keeps going on, right? But schools in this country are doing Black children a large disservice every day. And what I want to highlight is that most people read this chart completely wrong, and they lead with what Black children are not doing. But what this chart actually shows is what schools are not doing for Black children. So the key takeaway here is that the school system in many ways is failing over half of Black 8th graders in this country. But let me be frank, Black children are not inherently less smart than their peers. They don't just come into the world performing worse on tests, and they are not bad because their parents are bad parents. There are real systemic problems causing these outcomes. So the real problem is that Black students attend schools that have less of everything they need to be good schools. And I mean good schools in quotes, right? This is often because redlining left them more likely to live in the neighborhoods that have been starved of important resources like jobs, grocery stores, health centers, etc. And even Black people who do not live in these neighborhoods, they're often playing catch up. So let's start from my beginning and why I do this work. My nephew, Demetrius, moved into our home when we were both in the 3rd grade. So imagine having a brother that affectionately calls you auntie. That was our experience. And when he moved into our home, I learned a very important lesson. My nephew's school was drastically different than my school. His school had older books, less field trips, newer teachers, and frankly, he was often bored. So bored, he did his homework in the car on the way home. This experience helped me to identify a problem at only 9 years old. My majority white school was just better than his majority Black school. And let's be super clear, right? My own experience in that school was not perfect. I had my first experience with racism in that school when a boy told me to go back to Africa, and I have never forgotten it. These experiences taught me a valuable lesson about life and about schools, and I identified a big problem, and that problem is racism. Not just racism, but racism that, locks Black children out of high quality educational opportunities. And I decided in 3rd grade, I was gonna solve that problem. And it wasn't until much later I came to understand that I just can't solve racism, not alone at least, right? So in order to chip away at 400 years of racism in this country, I would have to transform a really big problem into smaller issues that I actually could solve. So a problem is something that is wrong. We can all identify really big personal, professional, or life problems like the one that I did. Racism is wrong, inequitable schools are wrong, but it's less clear who the person is that can fix those problems. I cannot go outside and just ask to speak to the manager of racism, right? So for example, so that could be really discouraging, but an issue is more specific, a smaller chunk of a larger problem. There's a clear solution with issues, it inspires people to do something different, and there's a clear decision maker, a person who can solve that problem. I didn't know this in 3rd grade, but I would go on to spend my career breaking really big problems like racism into smaller issues. And not just any issue, a winnable issue. And this country was built on racism, so it's not a problem we're gonna solve tomorrow. But there are many smaller issues that fit under the umbrella of racism that we actually can solve. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about the issues that I work on. So really big question, and the big thing that I'm gonna answer is why school systems are racist, what is the cause, and how we can win. I'm gonna talk about 4 issue buckets really quickly. It's gonna be the fastest policy talk ever. I'm gonna talk about school funding, school environments, educator diversity, and access to advanced coursework. These buckets are all connected in some way, and I work on most of these issues every day. Whoops. So funding is one of the primary ways that school systems remain inequitable in this country. My nephew's school, for example, had significantly less of the resources that matter. That's just not my story, and that's not his story. That's an American story. So schools serving students of color in this country receive $23 billion less in funding than schools serving majority white students. And it's not just about how much these schools get, it's about how well these schools are able to spend those dollars. My school had a strong parent fundraising and more money to invest in important resources and experiences, whereas my nephew's school had to do a lot more with their limited resources. And funding is a big issue, but that isn't the immediate issue I hope to solve. I first encountered the issue that I hope to solve when I interviewed for a teaching job. So I walk into the school office to be interviewed for this job, and I saw a line of black boys sitting in the office in silence, doing nothing, learning nothing. And they had been sent there by their teachers because they had in some way broken the rules. So it was then that I decided school discipline would be my winnable issue. And since then, I've made a point to talk to students who are touched by school discipline in some way. On the screen, there's a quote from a student who explained the school discipline issue better than I can. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to read it so it's in her voice and not mine. So school discipline is a symptom of a racist and punitive system that often fails to see children as children. Instead of helping students to learn and grow from mistakes, educators send them to the office or send them home, or even sometimes call the police. And Black students are more likely to be affected by that. Black girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended from school, and they're 5 times more likely to be arrested at school than white girls. And issues have to have a cause. So Black girls are more likely to be disciplined, frankly, because Black girls experience race and sex-based discrimination in classrooms. They are disciplined often for simply being Black. For example, in other settings, we would consider self-advocacy or assertiveness a leadership skill. But when Black girls do it in schools, they are often suspended for being loud, defiant, or talking back. And children are often expressive through their hair and their clothes. But when Black girls wear hair wraps or hoop earrings, they're sent home for dress code violations. These aren't just consequences, these are actions that leave too many Black girls stuck in the school to poverty pipeline. And this doesn't just happen because Black students inherently behave different than white students. They absolutely don't. This happens because racism is baked into school discipline and dress code policies. So the issue bucket 2 is the teacher issue. Black students have less access to experienced teachers, so that means that teachers who have been doing this for a little while and know what they're doing, and they also have less access to Black teachers. So in this country, nearly 80% of the teachers are white, and sometimes their mindsets are based solely in whiteness. So that means when they come into school, they have predisposed mindsets about who Black children are, what they need to wear, and how they need to behave. And so instead of celebrating their identities and cultures, schools often erase them. And research has shown that teachers of color can reduce school suspensions, and they have lots of other positive effects on students of color as well. But there aren't enough teachers of color in classrooms. And part of the reason is that when the system went wrong, following the Brown v. Board of Education, we lost 38,000 Black teachers and leaders after we integrated schools. And that's mostly because Black educators were not hired in integrated schools after that decision. And we have never really recovered, despite research showing that students benefit from teachers of color. So schools integration efforts have focused solely on students and not on teachers, and failed, frankly, on both fronts. So my last bucket is that schools that offer more rigorous and engaging coursework have better school climates. My nephew, as brilliant as he is, was likely not the only student in that school to be bored enough to do their homework in transit. And when I say advanced coursework, I'm talking about gifted courses, 8th grade Algebra 1, AP courses, dual enrollment, those types of things. So maybe if you took one of these courses, you're not surprised that Black children are locked out of these opportunities because either the schools just don't offer them, or even sometimes when they do offer them, they're not allowed to enroll in those particular courses. So you may walk into a high school in this country and you might be able to see visibly which students are in advanced courses based on their race. So the system has a way of keeping classrooms segregated. So Black students are locked out of rigorous coursework opportunities at every single school level: elementary school, middle school, high school, some would argue college. And this is an example of how many students are locked out of gifted and talented courses in this country. We would need 9 Staples Centers to see all the Black and Latino students locked out of gifted and talented courses. And even one student missing that opportunity is one student too many, because just being enrolled for a Black student increases the likelihood of enrolling in advanced courses later in school. That means that their colleges might be a little bit cheaper. And so it has lots of benefits and lots of long-term effects. So we just identified a cause. Let's talk about how to fix it really quickly. The first thing that I always do is I talk to the people who are affected. It's really important that my work includes the voices of young people who are directly impacted. So whenever I can, I talk to students and include their voices in reports or research. They are in school buildings more than me and more than most of us, so they can identify problems and the solutions, just as I saw a problem as a third grader. I also encourage school leaders to engage students and community members when they're creating policy. It's imperative that policy is created with people and not just for people. The second thing we do is to identify the people who can fix it. I tend to work with federal and state legislators, those responsible for making the rules, but many of the issues I presented today can be solved at the district or the school level. So we can talk to the superintendent or the principal. Because I know this, I know exactly, because I know who can fix the problems, I know exactly who to target my policy solutions toward. So I also want to quickly share some of the examples of solutions that I have proposed that address the issues that I talked about today, right? And so if schools serving students of color had better funding, they could invest in the staff that really could create safer learning environments. Those people like counselors, school psychologists. If we did a review of school discipline policies to make sure that they weren't anti-racist or sexist, we could really better serve students and make sure that they're able to stay in classrooms. If we invested in the training and the recruitment and the retention of teachers of color, a lot of these issues wouldn't exist like they do now. And if we universally screen students for giftedness and we automatically enroll students in advanced courses based off of their test scores or their grades, we would eliminate some of these disparities that I talked about today. So often systems work together to lock Black people out of lots of opportunities, but we can work together to dismantle them if we turn problems, big problems, into winnable issues. And this is a process that we can apply to any problems we identify, personal or professional, policy or not. And breaking things down into smaller issues is the most effective way to bring about change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kayla. Beautiful keynote speech and very meaningful. And it wasn't too long. You crammed a lot of information into a small window, and that takes talent. So thank you.
Okay, beautiful, wonderful, very informative, impactful speech. It was great. Well, Policy Pathways Incorporated would like to present to Ms. Kayla Patrick, who is the Senior Data and Policy Analyst, the Education Trust, an award in appreciation for your dedicated leadership and in special recognition of outstanding service in public policy and public administration. This is presented at the 3rd Annual Fall Celebration and Fundraiser, Thursday, October the 21st, 2021. Policy Pathway Board of Directors. Thank you, and you will receive this in the mail.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I did receive it today. It's a beautiful award.
Oh, you did?
And I want to thank Dr. Lucas and the board for presenting me with this award. I really appreciate it. And quick thanks to my parents who poured into me and my family and my friends, some of who are here today. I really appreciate all of the support you all give me so that I can do this work. And I want to also acknowledge the Education Trust, who allows me to have the platform to really push for bold change. So I really appreciate that. Thank you all.